Okay, so our recording is up and running. Let me just then get to my presentation. Okay, there we go. Once again, then from my side, just a warm welcome to our next online session for FAC 2601, Financial Accounting for Companies. This will be then our next online session. For those of you that haven't attended one of these before, a warm welcome. For those of you who are returning, also a warm welcome to our online session where we strive to go through all the lesson tools and provide you with a bit more insight with regards to these lesson tools. Focusing on more important or the most important issues, and also looking from a perspective of covering some theory as well as a few practical examples relating to the specific topic being covered. Just by way of introduction, my name is Frank Montgomery, one of the lecturers for this module, and I will be your host this morning regarding our online session. The content of the lecture, as indicated in the announcement that was posted during the week, is to cover the next lesson 2, which is financial instruments. And the way that I will go about it is to look at the applicable accounting standards covering financial instruments, specifically focusing on the important theory relating to financial instruments, and then looking to apply these theory of financial instruments through a few practical examples. The lesson 2 covered then on financial instruments in your study material is indeed lesson 2.8. Okay, the session, as you know, is recorded for the purposes of allowing you to go back if there's something that you want to revisit or something that you might have missed during the presentation, and then obviously also to the benefit of those students that are not able to join us this morning. And as soon as the session is done, this recording will then be uploaded on our Moodle site on MyUnisa. So you can just scroll down on the navigation bar, search for lesson 2 or online class, the next online class, which this one is online class number 7. Search for it there and you will find the video recording uploaded. As I've indicated during the presentation, I'm not able to see the questions. Therefore, I kindly request that if you've got any question, you might post it now or you just keep it till the end. But once the session is done and I've gone through the session, I will have a look at the Q&A section and address all the questions that came through, if that is fine with everyone. The lecturers, as you know by now for this module, is our module responsible lecturer, Mr. Baloyi, as well as Mr. Andre Eiseli. And both of these gents have already presented some of the sessions and will still present some of our future sessions. Just by way of getting in touch with us, our contact details, the easiest way to get in contact with us is with our dedicated module mailbox, which you will find at fac2601@unisa.ac.za. So any burning questions, issues you might have, send them through and we will try to respond and attend to those questions or queries that you might have timeously within a 24-hour period turnaround time. In addition, there is a message function on Moodle where you can send direct messages to us, or alternatively, you can engage in the discussion forum by posting in the discussion forum any issues or queries that you might have, for example, specifically with regards to this lesson tool or any of the other lesson tools already covered or those to be covered in future. And we can get in a nice discussion there to try and resolve any issues that you might have. So let's then get on to our session today covering lesson 2.8, financial instruments. As I've said, the first part of this session is to address the specific accounting standards governing financial instruments and, most importantly, the theory surrounding financial instruments. And then the second part will focus on the application of this theory through a few practical examples. Okay, our first standard is IAS 32. Okay, sorry for this. I just want to quickly check something from my side. Okay, yes, everything still seems to be running smoothly here. Yeah, I just wanted to check everything there, but it's all fine. So let's just get back to our presentation. Sorry for that. Okay. So, as I've said, our session today, financial instruments. The first accounting standard we are focusing on is International Accounting Standard 32, IAS 32. With regards to financial instruments, covered in this accounting standard is mainly the definitions. What exactly is a financial instrument? Now, a financial instrument, per definition, is a contract that gives rise to either a financial asset for one entity and on the counterpart a financial liability or an equity instrument of another entity. So there needs to be a contract between at least two parties, and this contract then will give rise, for the one entity it will be a financial asset, for the another entity it will be a financial liability or a equity instrument. And we'll get into the definition of each of these components as well, but that is in broad terms the definition of exactly what is a financial instrument. Contract between two parties resulting in a financial asset for the one and on the counterpart a financial liability or an equity instrument for the other entity. The primary instruments that we are covering and dealing with are with regards to financial assets. We've got receivables, financial liabilities, we've got payables, your creditors, and then equity. Now, equity instrument is normally in the form of shares. Okay, so shares that are issued result in an equity instrument. But all these fall under the grouping of financial instruments. So again, it's a contract where there's going to be a financial asset for the one, and on the other hand, a financial liability for the other party, or an equity instrument in the form of shares. It then goes further to specify what exactly is a contract. It is, like any contract, an agreement between two parties where there is clear economic results. The clear economic results, if it's a financial asset, it is receivables that you are entitled to. So when the contract is initiated, it will result in receivables that you will receive in future, whereas the other party is contractually obligated to pay in the form of payables for this contract that they entered into. There is clear economic results. Like I said, you're going to receive the receivables in future and you will have to pay it in future from the other party. There is limited discretion to void obligation and it's enforceable by law. So once you've entered into that contract, there is an agreement to deliver. It is a valid contract. And as we said, then it will result in either a financial asset or a financial liability or an equity instrument for the third party. And it's a binding agreement which they can't avoid any obligation, and it will be enforceable by law to comply with the terms of the agreement that they entered into. As far as the definitions of the primary instruments are then concerned, remember I said the primary instruments that we are dealing with are financial assets, financial liabilities, and our equity instruments. Now, a financial asset is basically either cash or the instrument in the form of shares, the equity instrument. So it means that we've got the contractual right to receive cash in the form of debtors or loan receivable. So financial asset will be either pure cash, an equity instrument in the form of shares, or we have got a contractual right to receive cash sometime in the future through an agreement that was reached to repay us our debtors or to receive a loan that is receivable. So if we've given a third party a loan, we're entitled, as per the agreement, to receive the cash of that loan in terms of the agreement sometime in future. On the other hand, a financial liability is a contractual obligation to deliver cash in the form of paying creditors or paying loans payable. So if we've obtained a loan, there will again be the terms and conditions in terms of the contract of when the repayment needs to take place, not only in the form of the capital, but as well as interest that will be levied on the outstanding balance. So that will be your financial liability. Or if there is an exchange of instruments that is unfavorable. So if the two entities exchange financial assets and financial liabilities between themselves, resulting in an unfavorable outcome, unfavorable meaning there's going to be a net outflow of value. In other words, your financial liability is more than a financial asset being exchanged. It is unfavorable for us. So the net outflow is then a net outflow of value that is unfavorable, and then it will be classified as a financial liability. The third primary instrument, as we identified, is our equity instrument, and that is normally the issue of ordinary shares. So if you issue the ordinary shares, it becomes a financial asset for us because we receive a fixed amount of cash by delivering a fixed number of shares. So that is the contract that we enter into. We make the shares available, and once you receive the shares, we receive the cash, and we need then to deliver a fixed number of shares, depending on the prospectus of what were the number of shares that was made available with this specific share issue. And that is the definition of our three primary instruments: your financial assets being in the form of cash, or the contractual obligation to receive cash in the form of receivables or loans. We've got our financial liabilities, where you are contractually obligated to make payments to creditors or loans. Or we've got our equity instrument, where we issue ordinary shares. And in return of the cash that we receive, we make available a fixed number of shares. The second accounting standard that covers financial instrument is International Financial Reporting Standard number 9, our IFRS 9. Now, IFRS 9 deals with initial recognition. So IAS 32 gives us the definition of what exactly is a financial asset, first of all, what is a financial instrument, and then under financial instruments identifies the primary instruments. What is an asset? What is a liability? What is an equity instrument? So once a financial instrument meets the definition requirements, it can be recognized. How do we recognize it initially? The initial recognition, so the timing of recording of a financial instrument is obviously when we are a party to a contractual provision of a financial instrument. So once again, that contract needs to be in place and it's a binding contract. Now, exactly when do we recognize that contract that we entered into? It will be either on the date that the entity commits to the sale or purchase, or the date that the delivery takes place. So you've got the option of when to make that initial recognition based on the timing of the recording. Either when you commit to the sale or the purchase of the financial instrument, or your policy might be to do it only when the delivery takes place. So once you've received the actual financial instrument, only then will it be initially recognized in terms of IFRS 9. At what value will it be measured? So once you've determined when to recognize it, at what value? It will be recognized at its fair value. And as we've seen in all previous sessions that we had, that fair value represents the price that would be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction between market participants at the measurement date. So at the measurement date, if the contract is entered in today, we need to determine what is the fair value. What do you deem to be the fair value to be? And that will be determined by normally the market price. For example, if you are issuing ordinary shares, if those shares are traded on the Johannesburg Stock or the Johannesburg Securities Exchange, it has got a fixed value based on the date of the transaction. And that would be deemed to be the fair value associated with the financial instrument, the value at which we are willing to offer the shares, and the value at which the purchaser is agreeing upon to make payment to obtain the shares. Now, fair value in most instances will be the transaction price, okay, because that is the transaction price that we agree upon between two parties. It could be the quoted market price in the active market. Okay, so as we've said, transaction price, for example, will be when you sell something on credit. So we create a financial asset based on the selling price of the product. In return, the purchaser enters into an agreement and a contract and creates a financial liability based on the transaction price that they agree upon to pay us in future. In the form of equity instrument, it will be the quoted market price in an active market, for example, as we've just said, when these shares are trading on the Johannesburg Securities Exchange. You can determine what is the fair value of that specific share on the date of the transaction. It can be based on discounted future cash flows. So if there's no cash flow taking place now, we need to determine based on the effective interest rate linked to the financial instrument, what will be the discounted future cash flow? Or it can be based on any recent prices. If it is an item that is not sold regularly, if it's an item that is not actively on the market, what were the sort of recent prices that willing buyers and sellers were prepared to pay for a specific financial instrument? So depending on what the instrument is and the type of transaction, these are the parameters that we use. Normally transaction price, quoted market price, if there is discounted future cash flows based on the effective interest rate or any recent prices for similar trading financial instruments will be utilized and can be utilized in terms of IFRS 9 for the initial measurement of the financial instrument. That initial measurement also needs to include any transaction costs directly attributable to the acquisition or disposal of the financial asset or liability. So any transaction cost, in other words, without these transactions costs, it would not have been able to have an agreement between the seller and buyer. So they are closely linked and interacted to the transaction. Therefore, these transaction costs needs to be capitalized and form part of the initial measurement of the value of the financial instrument. Now, clear examples of these are any fees or commission paid to agents involved in the process, any duties and transfer tax for transferring the financial instruments, and any regulatory levies by the security exchanges. So if the Johannesburg Stock Exchange has any specific levies associated with the trading of the shares, these will be part of the initial transaction cost, and we need to capitalize these transaction costs and include it in the cost price of the financial instrument at initial measurement date. So therefore, again, very important, any transaction cost directly linked and associated with the financial instrument transaction needs to be capitalized and included in the original cost price of the financial instrument. As far as a classification is concerned, so IFRS 9 then delves a little bit deeper into whether something can be classified as financial asset, a liability, or an equity instrument. In terms of IFRS 9, regarding the classification of financial asset, it is normally based on the business model and cash flow characteristics of the instrument. Now, financial instruments under IFRS 9 are classified, as we've said, on the business model test, and the business model test basically indicate how are the assets managed? Now, key classifications here include amortized cost. If these instruments or financial asset is held to collect, it will include fair value through other comprehensive income if this financial asset is held to collect but can also be sold. Or the third category is through fair value through profit or loss if our main intention is to trade with this financial asset. Okay, so the entity's business model for managing financial assets determines their classification. If it is held to collect, in other words, assets managed to collect contractual cash flows over the life will normally be measured and classified according to the amortized cost. Assets managed to achieve objectives by both collecting contractual cash flows and selling assets. So these are the hold to collect and sell model will be classified at fair value through other comprehensive income. And the third category is assets managed for trading or on a fair value basis will be classified at fair value through profit or loss. So those are the three classifications regarding financial asset based on the business model. Okay, as far as amortized cost is concerned, you will see in our study material that we are not dealing with this classification for our model. So what amortized cost basically represents, it is a financial accounting method under IFRS 9 that we use to measure debt instruments by taking the initial amount, subtracting principal repayments, and adding or deducting cumulative amortization by using the effective interest method. And we also reduce it for impairment. So it reflects the true value or it reflects the true interest income or expense over the time rather than just the cash flows. So it is just important to take note of what exactly is amortized cost and that it's one of the classification methods available on the financial assets. For our purposes, though, that is all that you need to know. You won't be required to do a calculation or to value a financial asset at amortized cost. We will only deal with the actual cash flow components of classifications, which are the other two components, at fair value through profit or loss, which is our the default category. So these are for financial instruments and assets held for trading, in other words, to speculate with. And when you classify it as such, you will exclude transaction costs. Remember we said if there are transaction costs that are attributable to obtaining a financial asset, it needs to be capitalized with the exception of this financial asset. These transaction costs won't be capitalized, but will be expensed in profit or loss in the year that they occur. So that is the main difference here. The other financial asset at fair value through other comprehensive income. So these are the assets not held for trading, where we're collecting cash flows at specific dates. They need to include transaction cost when we classify them. Okay, so again, just going back through our business model, we've got three categories. The hold to collect, where the assets manage to collect contractual cash flows over their life. So that's all that we are doing. They will be classified according to the amortized cost, which we are not dealing with. Those that were assets managed to achieve objectives by both collecting contractual cash flows and selling the assets, the hold to collect and sell, will be categorized at fair value through other comprehensive income. So they're not held for trading, then we're collecting cash flows on specific dates, categorized as financial assets through other comprehensive income and include transaction costs upon initial measurement. The third category are those assets managed for trading. Okay, so all we do is we trade with them. In other words, we speculate with them. They will be categorized at fair value through profit or loss. And remember, we will not include the transaction cost upon initial recognition. Okay, so that is classification in terms of IFRS 9 as far as financial assets are concerned. As far as financial liability is concerned, again, we don't deal with the amortized cost part, so we will only look at the financial liability recognized at fair value through profit or loss. So only those liabilities held for trading, and again, the same principle applies. We will not exclude the transaction costs or not include the transaction cost upon initial recognition. So we don't capitalize the transaction cost, we will expense it through our profit and loss in the year that they occur. As far as subsequent measurement is then concerned of our two categories, held through other comprehensive income or held through profit or loss. Financial asset at fair value through profit or loss. Any gain or loss recorded directly in the profit or loss. So what happens here? At initial recognition, we will record the financial instrument and the financial asset at its fair value. At the end of each financial year, we have to do a revaluation of the fair value. If there is an increase in the fair value, it results in a gain that we will recognize in the profit and loss section. If, however, the fair value has reduced and is less than the original amount recognized, we have to recognize a loss and record it directly in our profit or loss. The same applies with financial assets at fair value to other comprehensive income. So again, initially recognize it as fair value. At year end, do a subsequent revaluation of the fair value. If there's an increase, it will be a gain. If there's a loss or a reduction in the fair value, that will be a loss. The difference, however, is where this is recorded. This is recorded directly in equity. So not through profit and loss, it goes directly into our equity as far as recognition is concerned. So that is an important difference between the two regarding initial recognition. Those financial asset held for trading exclude transaction cost and recognize at fair value. At year end, determine if the fair value is increased or decreased and recognize that as a gain or loss directly in the profit or loss. Your financial assets that are basically held to collect and sell in future maybe are recognized initially at fair value, including transaction cost. Subsequent measurement, if there's any gain or loss, that is directly recorded in our equity component of the financial statements. As far as financial liabilities are concerned, regarding subsequent measurement, we only have financial liabilities at fair value to profit or loss. Hence, any gain or loss in fair value goes directly in our profit or loss. So exactly the same as was the case with financial assets that are held through profit or loss. Your speculative liability, same principle apply. Increase, recognized as a gain. Decrease, recognized as a loss. And it goes directly in our profit or loss component of the financial statements. The final accounting standard governing financial instrument is International Financial Reporting Standard 7. IFRS 7 deals with the disclosure. So once we've identified the financial instrument, we've determined at what value to be recognized and when to be recognized, where do we disclose everything in our set of financial statements. First of all, in the statement of financial position, we need to recognize the value at the end of a financial year. So depending on the type of financial instruments that we do have, whether it be a financial asset, whether it be a financial liability, whether it be an equity instrument, on the statement of financial position, we need to disclose the value as at the end of the year. At what value? What is the fair value of that specific financial instrument at the end of the year? And we disclose that in our statement. As far as the statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income is concerned, we will recognize any income associated with financial instrument. So that would be in the form, for example, dividends received on shares. It will be in the form of interest received on outstanding debtors. Needs to go through our profit and loss section. Any expenses associated with the financial instrument. Interest that we need to pay on the outstanding creditor. will go through your profit or loss. And then any gains or losses. Now, this would be the gains or losses on the fair value evaluation at the end of the year. Will also need to go through the statement of profit or loss, either in the profit or loss section or through the comprehensive income section if it affects our equity. So that is what needs to be disclosed as far as financial instruments are concerned. And that brings me to the end of the theory part concerning financial instruments. So the important accounting standards is your IAS 32, looking at the different definitions with regards to what exactly is a financial instrument, what gives rise to a financial instrument. There needs to be a contract between two willing parties. Then the identification of the type of instrument, whether it be a financial asset, financial liability, or an equity instrument. Then IFRS 9 deals with the recognition, initial recognition at fair value. Depending on the business model, we'll look at what type of financial asset or liability it will be classified. And then finally, IFRS 7 that looks at how this needs to be disclosed in a set of financial statements. Okay, so let's run through a few practical examples to see if we can apply with regards to the theory of financial instruments. So the first example, question 1, part A. So just briefly discuss the applicable accounting treatment of the following financial instrument: a financial asset at fair value through profit or loss, and a financial asset at fair value through other comprehensive, specifically looking at initial measurement, the subsequent measurement, and how to deal with gains or losses on this remeasurement. Now, as we've discussed, financial asset at fair value through profit or loss. So these are those speculative financial asset. Initial measurement is at fair value, excluding transaction cost. So it's only the fair value, the transaction price, excluding transaction cost, that will be measured as the cost of the item and be the fair value upon initial recognition. Transaction costs are expensed through the profit and loss statement. Subsequent measurement will also be at fair value, and they will compare the subsequent fair value with the initial fair value. Increase recognized as a gain, decrease recognized as a loss directly in our profit or loss section of the statement. So just straightforward, the initial measurement at fair value, exclude transaction cost, subsequent measurement also at fair value, and then if there's a gain or a loss, recognize it in the profit or loss. On the other hand, financial asset at fair value through other comprehensive income. So these are those that we hold to collect and sell in future. Initial measurement also at fair value, but you include transaction cost. In other words, transaction costs needs to be capitalized and add to the transaction price. So it will increase the fair value upon initial recognition. The subsequent measurement will again be at fair value. We compare the two fair values. If there's been an increase, recognize it as a gain. If there has been a decrease, we recognize it as a loss. But this will be recognized as part of the other comprehensive income part. In other words, direct to equity, and it won't go through profit or loss. So it won't go through your profit or loss before tax component. It will go directly against equity in other comprehensive income. And I hope that is clear to distinguish between the two financial assets on how to recognize initially, how to recognize subsequently, and how to treat the remeasurement increase or decrease with regards to the fair value itself. And then obviously what to include and not include upon initial recognition as far as transaction costs are concerned. Okay, the part B of this example, we've got Cash Limited acquired 25,000 ordinary shares in a listed company on 1 April 2015 And these shares were acquired with a long-term view and not for speculative purposes. So there they clearly give us an indication of what is the intention. So the intention here, the business model, is to determine how will this assets be managed. So these specific assets are managed to achieve objectives by both collecting contractual cash flows and by selling the assets maybe in future. So the contractual cash flows is in the form of dividends that we're going to receive. But it also does not exclude us from selling this investment in the future if it's not fruitful for us anymore. But initial intention was not to speculate with this type of investment. Therefore, this will be seen as a financial asset at fair value through other comprehensive income. This is the business model adopted by the company. These shares were purchased at R4 per share, and the transaction costs to make it happen resulted in 7,500 also paid by the purchaser. So it's directly linked and attributed in obtaining the shares. The market value of the shares at 30 June 2015 is R4.40 per share. So that market value obviously determined from the securities exchange. So these shares might be trading on the securities exchange, and by close of business on 30 June, they were now trading at R4.40 per share. Okay, which was our financial year end. Then on 31 July, the decision was made to sell these shares, and the fair value at that date was deemed to be R4.55 per share. It is the accounting policy of the company to reclassify the cumulative balance on the mark-to-market reserve to retained earnings when the asset or part of the asset is derecognized. So just to explain this in context, when we deal with a financial asset through other comprehensive income, we said that we recognize any gains or losses in fair value directly through equity. By recognizing the directly through equity, we create what is referred to as a mark-to-market reserve. So it's an equity reserve that we create where all these gains or losses are recorded in. Because remember now, if it is a financial asset held for speculative purposes, we recognize the gains or loss directly in the profit or loss. So your net profit at the end of the year will already reflect that gain or loss. With regards to these type of investments, seeing that they are not speculative of nature, we create this reserve up until the point that we do sell the shares. And when you do sell the shares, only then do we recognize it as part of our profits. But seeing that it is already in equity, we will just transfer it to our retained earnings. So it won't go through the profit or loss section. It is just a transfer from the one equity reserve being marked to market to another reserve by now actually recognizing the gains or losses that is actually realized upon selling the financial assets. So what is required from us based on this information? Show all journal entries for the above transactions in the accounting records of Cash Limited in order to comply with the requirements of International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS. And this would be then the IFRS directly relating to financial instruments, obviously, as we are dealing with financial instruments. Show all dates and calculations. It's not necessary to show any journal narrations. So the first obviously that you want to do here is initial recognition. So initial recognition will be on the transaction date. Here we entered into an agreement and we acquired these shares. We determined already it was not for speculative purposes, as that will then determine the future measurement and recognition of the fair value gains or losses. So our first transaction will be on 1 April 2015, where we create the financial asset investment in shares. And if it was paid in cash, we will create a bank payment for 107,500. If it was on credit, it will be a liability or a creditor that we create here. It will be at the transaction price, which was 25,000 shares at R4 per share. But remember, we said if it is classified as financial assets through other comprehensive income. All associated and contributed transaction costs needs to be capitalized. So this 7,500 won't be expensed through profit and loss. It is capitalized and added to the cost price of the investment. Hence, we add the 7,500 to the cost price of 100,000, and therefore we'll recognize a financial asset at its total cost of 107,500 Rand. So that is our journal entry upon initial recognition. Then at the end of the year, we need to do a remeasurement of the fair value based on the current market value of R4.40 per share. Remember, we obtained 25,000 shares. So at the end of the year, those shares are now valued at R4.40 per share. So that is the new fair value. Compared to what we've created upon initial measurement as being the fair value. So the total fair value at the end of the year, 25,440 per share, gives us a fair value of 110,000. Upon initial recognition, we determined the fair value to be 107,500. So there has been an increase or a gain in the share value. So we need to increase our investment value with the 2,500 difference, and we create the equity mark-to-market reserve for 2,500. Okay, so this 2,500 doesn't go through the profit and loss. It goes directly to equity by the creation of the mark-to-market reserve. So it's basically just the difference between the fair value at the end of the year and the fair value upon initial recognition. In this instance, we are dealing with an increase in fair value, hence increase the value of our shares and create an equity component through your mark-to-market reserve. Then, when we sell the shares, we need to determine the fair value as at that date. And first update the value of our investment. So on the date that we sold the shares on 31 July, it is deemed to be worth R4.55 per share. So it's trading on the Securities Exchange at R4.55 per share. So we first update and compare this fair value to the fair value that we created now at the end of the financial year, because we've already updated our investment with the fair value at the end of the year. So now the new fair value on 31 July is R4.55 per share. So 25,000 times R4.55, less the current fair value, which now sits at 110,000. Initial of 107,500 plus the updated 2,500 at the end of the previous year. So our total fair value at the end of the year was 110,000. It has now ever increased to R4.55. So there has been a further update in fair value, which is another gain. So again, we update our share account with the increase in fair value of 3,750, and we take this also to our mark-to-market reserve. It's just the update of the fair value on the actual date of the transaction by increasing the fair value by the further 3,750. Then the actual sale, we recognize in bank if we received the amount in cash, or we can create debtors, it was received in credit, and this is for the total amount that we sold it for, which is the fair value of R4.55. So we will receive 113,750, and the full amount needs to be taken out of the investment in shares, because obviously this asset doesn't exist anymore. It needs to be derecognized. What do we need to derecognize? The initial amount that we recognized it upon acquisition, the 107,500, it was added to with a fair value adjustment at the end of the year, and it was now added to with a fair value adjustment just before the sale took place. So currently our investment in share sits at 113,750, and this is the total amount that needs to be credited, because after this transaction, the remaining balance investment in shares should be zero. So if you put through this credit, we'll have a zero balance on investment in shares. And then the final part is now to realize, to record the realization of the sale that took place by transferring from the one equity component to the other equity component. So we need to write out the total mark-to-market reserve created, which was 2,500 at the end of the previous year, and now the 3,750 before the sale. So currently the mark-to-market reserve sits at a credit balance of 6,250. So we de-recognize it by debiting the mark-to-market reserve. So also here there should remain a zero balance. And this is then transferred to our retained earnings by recognizing the realization of this fair value gain over the period of the investment by taking the full 6,250 to our retained earnings. So in essence, we've made a profit on this financial asset of 6,250, which is now fully recognized through retained earnings. I hope these journal entries make sense. So once again, just briefly, initial recognition at the transaction price, including transaction costs. Then at the end of the year, do a fair value revaluation. There was an increase. So we increase the value of the asset and we create a mark-to-market reserve. On the date that we sold the financial assets, do another fair value valuation, increase the asset further, and when it is then sold, just de-recognize the financial assets in total from the financial statements, as well as your total mark-to-market reserve that was created by realizing through our retained earnings the total of 6,250. Okay, moving then on to our next example. We've got the different investments at the end of the financial year, 28 February 2015. We've got an investment in Neptune sitting at 45,000. The total issued share capital of Neptune in which we invested is 40,000 Rand, and it consists of ordinary shares issued at 2 Rand each. Jupiter, this is our company, owns 12,000 of these shares in Neptune that were bought for this 45,000 on 1 July 2014. Okay, always important to look at the dates, whether this was in previous year or in the current financial year. So if our year ends in 28 February 2015, this was purchased during the current year. The directors are of the opinion that the fair value of the investment at 2015 year end remained unchanged. So they are of the opinion that this fair value still sits at its cost of 45,000. The second investment is investment in Mercury sitting at 250,000. Here we own 100,000 of the 2,400,000 issued shares, purchased for 250,000 on 1 February 2014. That's important. 1 February 2014 would fall in the previous financial year because the current year would only have started on 1 March 2014. The shares in Mercury are traded on the Johannesburg Securities Exchange and has a market value at the end of the previous year of 2.50 Rand per share. At the end of the current financial year, they are trading at 3 Rand per share. And no adjustments for that increase in value has yet been made in the accounting records for the current financial year. Okay, and these shares were purchased for speculative purposes. So purchase for speculative purposes means these assets are managed for trading only. So it's currently still sitting at its original cost price. We still need to make these adjustments. Our third investment is investment in Pluto for 40,000. Here we own 5 of the 20,000 shares, purchased on 1 May 2014, which falls in the current financial year at a cost of 40,000 Rand. This investment is designated as a financial asset at fair value to other comprehensive income. So the business model here is that these assets are managed to achieve objectives by both collecting contractual cash flows in the form of dividends, but also for future selling. According to the directors, the market value of the shares was 12 Rand per share on 28 February 2015, the end of the year, and this adjustment must still be recorded. So when the shares are not trading on a securities exchange, you can't find a value. Your company directors will look at current markets, similar type of transactions and similar type of instruments, and based on the best information available, they will make a valuation of what they deem the market value to be. And this will be then deemed the fair value as at the end of the financial year. So now we are required to record the financial assets in the financial statements for the year ended 28 February 2015. So we need to look at our three different investments that we have here. We first got the investment in Neptune, which is considered a subsidiary of us because we've got more than a 50% ownership in shares. Okay, how do we get that? Neptune issued 40,000 shares at 2 Rand per share, meaning they've got 20,000 shares issued in total. Of those, we obtained 12,000 shares. So we've got 12 of the 20,000 gives us a 60% ownership, and therefore it will be seen as a subsidiary. Subsidiaries are dealt with in FSC 2602. For our purposes, we only need to know how to disclose it in the financial statements if it is deemed to be a subsidiary. This investment at a cost price of 45,000, and remember at the end of the year, the directors deemed the fair value to be unchanged. So they deemed the fair value at the end of the year to be also still 45,000. So no adjustment in fair value is necessary for the investment in Neptune. Our second investment was investment in Mercury. This is held at fair value through profit or loss, a speculative investment. It had a cost of 250,000. The fair value at the end of the previous year was deemed to be 2.50 Rand per share. And remember, we obtained 100,000 shares. We obtained 100,000 shares in Mercury. So at the end of the previous year, the fair value is deemed to be 250,000, which is still exactly the same as the initial cost. So no adjustment necessary in the previous financial year. We will then start off the new year at its current fair value of 250,000. Then at the end of the year, the fair value is deemed to be 3 Rand per share. So our 100,000 shares is now worth 300,000 Rand. So there is an adjustment, a gain in fair value of 50,000 that will need to be recorded in the financial statements. Then our investment in Pluto, which is held at fair value through other comprehensive income, as it was specified. It had a cost price of 40,000 Rand. The fair value at the end of the year is deemed to be 12 Rand per share. And remember, here we obtained 5,000 shares. So those 5,000 shares are now deemed to be worth 12 Rand for each and every share. So in total, our investment is now worth 60,000 Rand. So the fair value adjustment required is an increase or a gain of 20,000 Rand. So these are then our three investments. The first one, a subsidiary investment with no adjustment required. The second one, a financial asset held at fair value through profit or loss, our speculative investment with an adjustment of 50,000 in the current year. And the third one is an investment that is at fair value through other comprehensive income with an adjustment of 20,000 required at the end of the current financial year. So as far as the disclosure is concerned, so in the statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income for the year ended 28 February 2015, under other investment income, because remember, your investment that you make is not part of your main business activity, so it can't be part of the operating component or the operating section. It will fall under other investment income. Here, we will record the gain on the financial asset held through profit or loss. So this is the gain on the speculative investment, our second investment. That 50,000 is recorded in your statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income as part of your profit and loss component of the statement. And it's classified under other investment income, specifically indicating that this is a gain on financial asset held through profit or loss. The second investment that we recognize is the one that is not held for trading. And here you need to recognize it, remember, any gain through equity. So it doesn't go through profit or loss, it goes through equity. So the bottom part of this statement, you will have your other comprehensive income. And here we recognize the gain on financial asset through other comprehensive income, the total fair value adjustment that we calculated of 20,000 Rand. So in both instances, fair value adjustments, but difference in where it is disclosed in the statement of profit or loss. The speculative value increase or fair value adjustment goes through as part of the other investment income. As it's not part of your main business activity, it can't be operating income. And the fair value adjustment on the financial asset held through other comprehensive income goes directly to equity. Hence, it is recognized under other comprehensive income. As far as the disclosure is concerned in the financial position, remember we said in the statement of financial position, we need to disclose the fair value at the end of the year. Under your non-current assets, we will have the investment in subsidiary, because investment in subsidiary is for the long term, because you are sharing in the profits of a subsidiary. So the intention is not to only share profits for less than a year. It is a long-term period. Therefore, it falls under the definition of a non-current asset. The investment in subsidiary at the end of the year is deemed to be 45,000 Rand, which is the fair value year. Okay. It was the same as the cost, but this is the end fair value that needs to be recognized. Also, under your non-current asset, we recognize financial assets, and this is a financial asset held through other comprehensive income. Again, remember, the business model is here to manage this asset to achieve collecting contractual cash flows mainly. So it's not a short-term investment. It's not the intention to sell it within 12 months, hence classification as part of non-current assets. Disclosed at its end fair value of 60,000 Rand, which we calculated here. The 5,000 shares at the fair value at the end of the year, it will now be disclosed at 60,000 Rand as part of financial assets under non-current assets. And then finally, your current assets, we also disclose here financial assets. This is your speculative investment, because the intention here is to buy and sell over a short period span. It classifies under the definition of a current asset, so we need to disclose it at its fair value at the end of the financial year, which we calculated to be the 300,000 year. The 100,000 shares that you do have at 3 Rand per share. And that is where we will disclose it as part of our current assets, the financial assets at its fair value at the end of the year of 300,000 Rand. And that is where we will disclose then the fair value adjustments in your statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income, and then the end fair values at the end of the financial year. Okay, moving on to example question 3, more discussion type of question. Discuss the concept of equity risk and how it is useful in determining whether a financial instrument is a financial liability or an equity instrument of the issuer. Okay, so that's a concept. What is equity risk and how does it assist us in determining whether you are dealing with a financial instrument or a financial liability? Now, equity risk refers to the extent to which holders of a financial instrument are exposed to losing their investment in that financial instrument. So an equity risk taker takes the risk of not receiving any return on the investment. So you are basically investing in a share with the possibility of receiving dividends, but you're not entitled to the dividends. You are taking the risk of maybe not receiving any return on the investment, as those dividends may or not be paid depending on the financial position of the institution in which you obtained the shares. And equity risk also takes the risk of not receiving back the amount invested. So there's a possibility that you can lose the entire investment. So you are only entitled to periodic returns once all other obligations of the company have been paid. So the company first needs to settle all creditors, all the liabilities. If there's anything remaining, the equity risk taker will receive any returns. And they are also entitled only to the residual left owed in the company on winding up after all liabilities have been repaid. So if the company for one or other reason is liquidated and you are an equity risk holder or an equity holder in the company, it means that you might not receive any of your money back because all other liabilities first needs to be settled. So your equity risk takers is basically to exposed to losing the investment in a financial instrument totally by not receiving any income, as well as not basically losing your entire investment. So if this is how your situation is classified, it means that it will be classified as an equity component of the specific investment. So how does it differ from a debt investor? A debt investor is also entitled to periodic returns, but they can demand that their funds invested be returned. So debt investors bear credit risk and liquidity risk, not equity risk. Okay, so that is very important here. So debt investors basically hold a senior position over equity investors, and they are primarily concerned with the borrower's ability to repay the principal and the interest. They bear credit risk. So what is credit risk? Debt investors bear the risk that the borrower will fail to make required interest or principal payments. They also bear liquidity risk. This is the risk that the debt investor cannot sell their investment quickly at a fair price. And all of this is extremely important for the concept to determine whether or not the financial instrument is a liability or an equity instrument of the issuer, because it assists in determining the substance of the party's rights and obligations under financial instrument. Okay, so you need to distinguish with regards to obligations on the financial instrument, whether you have the equity risk. So if you've got the equity risk, it means you're exposed to losing the investment in a financial instrument and also not receiving any return. And then it will be classified as an equity instrument. If you are a debt investor, it means you also bear the credit risk and the liquidity risk, but not equity risk. So they are entitled and can demand the periodic returns, and they can demand that their funds invested be returned. And if you therefore are a debt investor, it will be classified as a financial liability. And that is how you can distinguish, based on the different rights and obligations, how the financial instrument needs to be classified. Okay, question 4. Why are financial assets not all measured at fair value through profit or loss? Remember, with financial assets, we said depending on the business model, they can be either assets managed to collect contractual cash flows over their life. And in that instance, we use the amortized cost. They can be managed to achieve objectives of both collecting contractual cash flows and selling the assets, and which scenario we will be classified as financial assets through other comprehensive income. And thirdly, they can be managed for trading purposes, in which instance they will be measured at fair value through profit or loss. So what is the reason that not all financial assets can simply be measured as fair value through profit or loss? So we simply measure all of them through profit or loss, and any fair value will be recognized directly in your profit or loss section of the statement. So important here, the fair value model does not always provide the best and most correct or reliable information to users. Because remember that fair value is sometimes difficult to determine if the instrument is, for example, not listed on the Johannesburg Securities Exchange. Then you need to provide valuations based on market fluctuations, market prices, recent prices, which is not always 100% accurate. So what benefit will it give the user to gain from knowing fluctuations in the market price of an instrument when such fluctuations do not represent change to the cash flows that the entity will be collecting? Because remember now, by determining that fair value, we are estimating what that gain or loss might be based on the current value. but it can fluctuate. So it is not a certainty to say that the fair value recognized at the end of the year will be the different fair value. It can still fluctuate based on what is happening in the market. Prime example being the impact of the Iran war at the moment. So in those instances, the amortized cost model provides more relevant and useful information about the amounts, timing, and uncertainty of the contractual cash flows that will be collected. Selling a financial asset when concerns arise about the collectability of the contractual cash flows, when there's an increase in the credit risk, does not preclude the asset from being measured at amortized cost. So even if you still want to sell that asset, you can still recognize it at amortized cost. So amortized cost is normally the best option available for assets managed to collect contractual cash flows. So once again, just the understanding of what exactly amortized cost means and what it will be best suited for, but not how to calculate amortized cost for our purposes. When the cash flows are not purely interest in principle, in other words, speculative cash flows, or the asset is in fact held for trading or even for sale, it then makes more sense to hold such an asset at fair value, because this would provide useful information on the expected, it is still unknown, future cash flows of the asset and the worth of the assets that they should be sold. Because remember, with speculation, the intention is there for a short turnaround time. So that fair value that we determine is very close to the actual fair value that might realize. And that is why we do have the different recognition with regards to either fair value or amortized cost. And then for our purposes, we are only focusing on the fair value, but just important to know where and why the amortized cost model will provide more and relevant, useful information if the asset is managed to collect contractual cash flows over its lifespan. Next and final example that we'll be looking at today, question 5. On 1 July 2023, Expert Limited invested in listed bonds in Magic Limited. On this date, Expert estimated the 12-month expected credit loss on the bonds at the amount of 35,000. So what exactly is a credit loss and what is listed bonds? So listed bonds are debt securities that trade on an exchange like the JSE, allowing issuers to raise capital from investors for projects. They are popular because they provide liquidity, price transparency, and diverse options available to the purchaser. A credit loss on bonds arises from the risk that an issuer fails to make timely interest or principal payments that will result in the fact that they can't meet its obligation, require investors to face potential losses. So this credit loss is a potential loss that we are facing of 35,000 due to the fact that the issuer might fail to make timely interest or principal payments in terms of the bonds that were issued for the 12-month period. So these are the details. The maturity date of the bonds is 30 June 2026 in 3 years' time. The applicable coupon rate is 6%. Interest is payable on 30 June. The nominal value of the bond is 12,000. We purchase 150 and the redemption will be at nominal value in future. On 30 June 2024, which is the end of the year or your financial year end, Expert assessed the credit risk of the bonds to estimate the expected credit losses at reporting date. So this was initially upon the date that we acquired the bonds. We estimated a credit loss of 35,000. Now at the end of the year, so at the end of the year, we can make a better estimation of the credit losses. Okay, because during this assessment, the directors obtained information that Magic Limited was in financial distress, meaning it was most likely to fail to make timely interest or any principal payments. increasing the credit risk involved with the listed bonds. So expert now determines that the credit risk of the bonds increased significantly since recognition of the bonds, since the initial recognition. Consequently, expert measures the lifetime expected credit losses on 30 June at 125,000. So that is a total loss over the 3-year period of the listed bond. Then at the end of the next financial year, they determined that the credit risk of the bonds has even further increased significantly and is now measured at 165,000 Rand. So initially, upon acquisition, the credit risk or the credit loss risk was deemed to be 35. At the end of the year on 30 June 2024, it increased to 125. And now on 30 June 2025, it has increased to 165,000. So required from us, with reference to the investment in listed bonds, disclose the changes in the loss allowance, which is the allowance for the expected credit losses of the bonds in the financial statements of Expert Limited for the year ended 30 June 2025. So how will we disclose this in a set of financial statements? So in our notes for the year, we will have listed bonds loss allowance, where we make provision for the credit loss. So initially, we had the 12-month expected credit losses, which was our loss allowance during the year that we obtained the bonds. So there was no loss allowance at the beginning of the year because they didn't exist at that date. Then with the new bonds, we originated a credit loss expected of 35,000. This was then transferred at the end of that year to impaired financial assets and creating a lifetime expected credit loss of 35,000 Rand. At the end of 2024, there was a changes in the risk parameters as it was now deemed to be 125,000. So the difference between the 35 and 125 is the new increase of 90,000 that we need to provide for. And again, there was change in the risk parameters at the end of the current year because now it is deemed to be 165,000 in total. So a further 40,000 needs to be added to the lifetime expected credit loss with regards to the listed bond. So with regards to this listed bonds, it's just the initial recognition of the credit loss when they originated, and then we transfer and create the total expected credit losses adjusted at the end of each financial year, whether there's an increase or a decrease in the total loss allowance that we create with regards to our listed bond. And that brings me to the end of our presentation today. I hope you found it insightful and that everything on financial instruments that you were worried or concerned about has been cleared out of the way. I will now just close down my presentation and then I'll have a look at any questions that you might have regarding the session today. Thank you. Okay, so more than welcome then to drop any questions that you might have in the Q&A section. I will just quickly scan through the questions and to see if there are any questions already listed. Okay, the very first question is a pretty long question here. Okay, let me just see here. Okay, the first question here that I see is, will there be a question? Okay, now let me just see here. Yeah. Okay, will there be a question where we have to calculate the fair value per share when the company sells the shares, or it will be given? Normally, there will be indication of what the fair value will be, or as we had in our examples, they will say that the fair value per share, for example, is 3 Rand per share. To calculate the total fair value, you just need to multiply that with the number of shares, and that will be the calculation of the fair value. So if it's not given, it will be pretty straightforward and easy to do the calculation. The next question, as I said, is a very, very long question. So let's have a look at this. I wanted to ask regarding studying through old question papers for assessment 2, past papers, will we more likely to be asked to explain a profit or loss, like with the categories and workout sections rather than the whole profit or loss, and the same with other statements? Yes, we are sort of moving away with just asking a full set of financial statements. So mostly the focus will be on providing certain sections of the financial statements. For example, just the how can I say, your short-term assets or just the long-term assets, the operating part of the statement of profit or loss, the investment income part. So only small sections will be asked. It is highly unlikely that you will still get a full set of financial statements that you need to complete. I've also been working through leases and want to ask, when it comes to writing a memo about the lease, about the concrete treatment of it, does that have to be so long, or it can be shortened with main points? Obviously, as long as you address the main points. So if they ask you to identify whether it's a lease, you need to identify the relevant points and then obviously support that with why you say that. So looking at what qualifies as a lease, what are the IFRS requirements. So if you can address those main points, then yes, obviously you can keep it as short as possible, just to ensure that all relevant points are addressed in the support of the memo that you write to identify whether an item is a lease or at how it should be recognized in financial statements. Okay, let's just see here if there's any new question. Thank you for the class. Only a pleasure. Okay, then it's a question. Why do we add transactional cost on that question? We did general entries. Okay, it depends on the type of financial asset. If you go right back to question 1, we discussed it there as well. So if we are dealing with a financial asset through other comprehensive income, all transaction cost related to that investment needs to be capitalized and included in the cost price. So you can't create a separate journal entry. You just add it to the cost. Okay, that cost of 7,500, I think you add it to the cost of 100,000 that we paid for the shares, and we recognize the total 107,500 as a cost price of the investment. Okay, because that is how financial asset at fair value through other comprehensive income is structured, in that all transaction costs need to be capitalized. It can't be expensed. If it was a financial asset through profit or loss, yes, that 7,500 would go through as transaction costs, and there would be a separate journal entry for that, by debiting your transaction expenses and crediting your bank account with the 7,500. So it won't be included and capitalized as part of the cost price of the investment. Okay, those are all the questions that I can see so far. I hope I've addressed all of them successfully. We still have a few minutes left in our session, so please feel free to post any more questions that you might have in that section there. Okay, which learning units will be covered in assessment 2? Once again, as always, please remember all this information is available on our module site. So if you just go to lesson tool 0, if you scroll down on lesson tool 0, you will see a little table with all assessment details regarding the dates, the times, and the content of all those assessments. As far as assessment 2 is concerned, it will cover lesson tools 1 up until 7, meaning that this lesson tool won't be included. But unfortunately, due to the timing constraints, we have still had to fit in this lesson tool. Otherwise, we won't be able to get through all of them during the course of the semester. But for assessment 2, it will then be lesson tool 1 to 7. Okay, no new questions yet. We still have, let's say, another 5 minutes. I give another 5 minutes for any questions that you might have. You're more than welcome to drop them in the Q&A section. If anything was not maybe answered or clear for you during the session, remember the recording will be made available. You can have a relook and revisit at it. And then obviously you also have the option to drop us any questions that you might still have through our module mailbox on the discussion forum, whichever way you prefer to get in contact with us. Don't see any new questions as yet coming through the Q&A section. Okay, thank you for a great class. Only a pleasure. Glad you enjoyed this. Thank you for clear explanation, sir. It's only a pleasure. We try our best. I know it can be overwhelming, and sometimes some of these concepts seem very difficult. But yeah, I think it's always just a process of breaking things down, first going through the theory, making 100% sure that you understand exactly what the standard requires from us, and then it is just a situation of applying those practical in a specific situation that will guarantee success when you need to answer assessment or exam questions. Still allowing time for any questions you might have. Feel free to drop them there in the Q&A part, and I will quickly address those for you. Let's say we give it another 3 or 4 minutes. Still have time to get any of those burning questions through that you might have at this point in time regarding financial instruments. Okay, let's just see. Okay, thank you for a great lesson. My pleasure. We aim to please. Okay, so let's give it the final 3 minutes. Final 3 minutes counting down. Any more questions, issues that you might have? Now is your time to pop those in the Q&A section for me. Okay, so is it a waste of time to practice on past question papers starting from 2013 now that the structure of questioning is evolving? Yes, most definitely. I mean, if you look back at 2013, remember that the way that questions and the structuring of question is changing and evolving, but also the module has changed and evolved. So topics that were covered in 2013 might not be covered now, or the accounting standard has changed during this time. So many of those old papers will not be relevant anymore. Even if you go back to 2023-24, you will see there's no exam papers because we were on a continuous assessment policy or strategy. So there were no exam papers. So basically what you can go back to would be, I would say, only 2025. Because in 2025, there was the proper exam papers, we had exactly the same topics that we are currently covering, and this is we started to introduce a new way of asking questions involving a lot more thinking and discussion type of question than rather just a full set of financial statements. So yes, you can get good ideas and concepts from old papers, but in most of those papers, the information won't be relevant anymore, unfortunately. Like I said, due to the fact that the questioning has evolved, as well as the topics has changed quite a lot over time, not only with regards to standards changing, but also the content of the module changing, with new lesson tools coming in and old lesson tools going out. And I mean, even as we are speaking, we are in the process of updating our module again for next year, with the inclusion of new topics and the exclusion of some topics that will be moving between first and third years. So yeah, as far as past papers is concerned, go not back much further than 2025. Okay, that takes us to the final minute. 1 minute for one last question that you might still have. There is still time for that final question, should you have one more question. Okay, so clear enough. I must only stick to the tutorial to one past question on the resources than 25 exam questions. Yes, that would be my recommendation. There are more than enough resources available on the module site. You've got past mock exam papers available. There's a tutorial letter 102 with additional questions, and some of those questions coming from past assignments, which we would have adapted, obviously, for the new requirements. So yes, basically focus on the resources that are available on our module site, as that would give you a very good guidance of how to approach and what to expect come assessment and exam time. Again, with that, I think that brings us to the end of our session. Once again, thank you so much for your attendance. You will note that we are taking a bit of a break in our online sessions now. I think our next session is in about in 3 weeks' time, obviously to make way for the assessments now. Assessment 2, remember, next week, Friday. We wish you all the best with regards to that assessment. Good luck. Any questions, issues that you still have in the build-up, feel free to be in touch with us, and we will do the best to assist you in that regard. Thank you so much once again. God bless and keep well. Goodbye, everyone.